Hello everyone, this is a very tired editing James, just jumping in before the episode starts. For some reason there was a bit of an issue with the audio this week. It seemed quite low, so I had to boost it, which means there's a very slight buzzing in the background. I noticed it a lot while editing. I don't know if it comes across quite as obviously to anyone just listening. I'm not sure, but it is 20 past 12 at night, and the episode goes out in the morning, so there's not really much more I can do. I don't really want to delay the episode, so I'm just having to kind of boost the audio and tidy it up as best I can and let it go out as it is. Hopefully it's okay, hopefully you enjoy it, and hopefully I can go to sleep very soon. Thank you very much for bearing with me, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to Super A to Z, episode 4, and we've finally reached the first letter of the alphabet. This week I'm talking about A.S.P, Airstrike Patrol. Or am I? Because this game has caused a slight issue in the naming conventions of the show. It wasn't until I started looking at it that I found out that Airstrike Patrol is the American name for the game, released over here and in Europe and Australia as Desert Fighter. So really, I should be looking at this a little bit further down the line. It might come as a surprise to you all. I am a British man, and so you would think that I really should be looking at the PAL titles of these games. But I've done it now. I've made a mistake. I do not have the time to do another episode. I'm flying by the seat of my pants this week. I am recording and editing this about 14 hours before I need to upload it. It's been a week. I've had my birthday, I've been really busy at work, and I really didn't want to miss my usual Wednesday upload because I want to try and be as consistent as possible going forward. I could have delayed it a week or a few days. I really didn't want to do that though, especially this early on. I really wanted to be as consistent as possible and release the episode the same day that I always release the episode. So I couldn't skip forward to the next game, record that one, and come back to this when I reach the letter D. So I'm just going to commit to it. And so because of that, I now have to commit to doing the American titles of all the games with alternate titles over in the US, because I have to have uniformity. That's my problem. I could go back to using EU games after this, but it would stress me out massively. So we're just going to have to live with it. I'm going to have to go with American titles from this point onwards. But it's not the end of the world. The games are all the same. I will reach all the games eventually. And I don't really know if there were that many that had different titles. But we'll come across them, we'll find out, and it'll be an interesting part of the journey. So, yeah, that's my excuse anyway. Apologies for anyone that is particularly bothered about hearing about the EU versions of the game. I don't think anyone's really going to care, to be honest. I think it's just me worrying myself that I've got it wrong and I've made a mistake. I'm going to make 100 mistakes over the course. Well, 100 is probably underselling it. I'm going to make a shitload of mistakes between now and the letter Z. I really don't need to worry too much about it. But I wanted to be very transparent and open about that, essentially. It is a mistake. I never planned to be like, oh yeah, I'm always just going to do the American titles. I'm not going to try and cover that up or anything. I fucked up. But it really isn't the end of the world. I'm not missing anything out. It's just going to be that I'm talking about this game now instead of in a 30, 40 episodes time. Airstrike Patrol was released in September of 94 in Europe, February of 94 in Japan, but it wasn't released until January of 95 in the US. It was developed by Opus Studio, who develops a ton of other SNES games of various different genres, some F1 games, a couple of RPGs, a lot of action games, but nothing really of note a great deal. They did develop a game called Half Minute Hero for the PSP, which I love and would fully recommend it to anyone if you haven't already played it. It's a fantastic little game. It was published by Sata in the US and Japan, and System 3 in the PAL regions. Sata published over 50 games, but again, nothing really much of note. I think Tetris 64 was probably the most well-known game that they published. System 3, they developed and published a large selection of games from the mid-80s through to late 2010s. Again, nothing really that much of note. They did a lot of Spectrum and Commodore games, and weirdly they had a lot of Ferrari licensed games throughout the years. Not quite sure how they managed to get that, but unfortunately, really, there's not a great deal to talk about with the developers and publishers of this game, so let's move on and go straight into the credits, and we'll see if it gets any better. Spoilers, it doesn't really. Okay, so looking at the credits, a lot of the people that worked on this game never worked on another game again, which does surprise me because I thought this game was actually really quite good, but more on that in a moment. Some of them worked on this and just one other game, and that other game was, apologies for pronunciation here, Wally so Sogase Ilon Nokuni da Boken, which is a Japanese Super Famicom Where's Wally/Waldo game. And that was kind of it for probably 75% of the people that worked on this game. They all started on that game, moved to this game, and then just faded into obscurity. The producer of the game was Takayuki Suzuki, and he pulled double duty and also did programming on it as well. He was credited on 44 other games, but again, as is the sort of tradition of this game so far, nothing really all that notable. Probably the Kid Icarus 3DS game, the most well known out of what he did. He was the music director on a few not safe for work Mahjong games though, so there's that. Man's got to eat, I suppose. The music was done by Jun Inoki, and he ended up basically with the same career path as the producer and working on all the same games. And Jun Tsuda was credited as the game producer, and I'm not sure how that's different to just a producer in general. I'm not sure. He was credited on 19 games, including that Where's Wally game, but he did end up directing Super Kirby Clash on the Switch. He produced Kirby Fighters on the Switch, and he had a special thanks credit on Kirby and the Forgotten Land on the Switch as well. So he must have made a bit of a name for himself in the Kirby universe, I suppose. 3D models of the game were credited to Kei Suzuki, who he worked on the Chrono Trigger port for the PS1, and that really is about it. I sort of pulled these names out of nowhere, really, not through any particular reason. Although the 3D models in the game are quite nice, there was nothing particularly notable. It was just the fact that he had worked on a fairly big game moving forwards, but that really is it. It's really bizarre that the majority of these people didn't remain in this industry, because they absolutely could have done. They put together a really fun game, and I'm going to get into that now and talk to you about the gameplay and a little bit about the story as well. There isn't really much story to talk about. The game's set during the Gulf War versus a country known as Zerak and the Zeraki forces, which is a little bit on the nose. But it is weird that the Gulf War is referred to by name in the game. So I guess the fact that they've changed the name of the countries involved is something. And that really is it about the story. You go on various missions, the war progresses. There is a hint of something more story-driven, and it all comes a bit out of nowhere near the end, but I will get to that a bit later on. The game is a top-down, isometric sort of shooter, and it throws you straight in with a mission briefing telling you to destroy various satellite arrays to hinder the enemy, and me in my classic style, I just dived straight in without looking at any instructions or anything at all. I was expecting a 1942-esque shooter, where it would just be me blowing up waves of enemies as I moved up a screen, but it wasn't that at all. What actually happened was I was dropped into a map in an F-15 with no direction, and I was free to roam. The F-15 was armed with air-to-air cannons, homing air-to-ground rockets. I saw some tanks, and I just started blasting the hell out of them. I saw some buildings, fired off the air-to-ground rockets, and you get left with some nice sprites when you destroy a building, which is good. Every ground unit has its own kind of specific sprite for once it's been blown up, and it remains there throughout the game as well, which is nice. I didn't really know what I was doing or where I was going, and I ended up flying off the map, which sends you straight back to HQ. And it was at this point that I realised that I'd fucked up. A CNN style news alert popped up. They're GNN in the game, but it's almost exactly the same logo, and it mentioned huge civilian casualties and friendly fire. It turned out the tanks I destroyed were friendly, and the buildings were just a small civilian town near the border of the map. Oops. So at this point, I decided that I needed to know how the game actually worked, because I enjoyed the feel of it, and I wanted to make sure I was playing it properly. And it turns out before going into a mission, you can check the intel of an area. It shows you the map, you can scroll through all the units and the buildings in the area, whether they're friendly, civilian, enemy. When you're in the mission, you can bring up the map and see where the next target is most of the time, although there are a couple of exploration-style missions that you have to work out for yourself. And the game's focused mainly on bombing runs. There's some air-to-air dogfighting, there's some unfriendly MiGs that patrol the areas you fly into, and the dogfighting does feel really good because you have control over your speed, slower speed, tighter turns, but you're more open to being shot because you're going slower. If you speed up, you can pull away, but you have much less manoeuvrability. So the air-to-air stuff is quite fun, but it's not really a focus of the game as such. I spent most of my time using the second plane option the game offers, the A-10 Thunderbolt. It has absolutely no air-to-air weaponry. It's designed purely for bombing runs and air-to-ground cannons that let you strafe ground vehicles, and that's where the fun of the game really was. Once you've got your mission and you've gone through all the intel, you get a time limit, usually anywhere from 24 to 60 hours, and each flyout or sortie, it's referred to in the game, takes a chunk of time away from that. Then if you change your loadout between sorties, that takes a bit more time away, usually 3.5 hours to change a loadout. And it was an interesting mechanic. It didn't cause issues, really. A time limit normally stresses me out massively, but it didn't in this. It felt realistic, I suppose. I was playing the game on the easiest difficulty, as is my style, so I imagine the higher difficulties, the time limit is maybe more of a threat, because I know there's a fuel conservation mechanic in the game as well. On higher difficulty, that's much harder to manage, so you would have to go off and refuel a lot more often, which would then eat into your time. The game plays out over various areas, and it really has the atmosphere right for a war game. There's a real push and pull feeling where failed missions don't necessarily end the game, but make later sort of times more difficult, or they can make public opinion of you worse. There's 3 meters that change as the game goes on: force, supplies, and opinion, and what they end up at actually determines the ending you get. Yes, there is multiple endings in this game. So much more to it than I really thought. I just thought I was going into a shoot 'em up, which it really isn't. It's a lot more strategy, but active control over the unit. The bombing in the game feels really satisfying. You've got this target reticule that shows where the bomb's going to land, and some of the targets, like the oil refineries, are very large areas with multiple buildings, and a slow fly past and spamming the bomb button leaves a huge amount of destruction behind you, and it's really satisfying and really enjoyable. Every structure is destructible, for better or worse. Some of them you really don't want to be blowing up, but it does mean that strategy comes into play a lot more than I expected it to. I found that a good strategy was to scope the area out with the F-15 first. The F-15 was much faster, and you could clear out the MiGs with air-to-air dogfighting, before then coming in and clearing out the ground units and buildings with the A-10. There's a lot to think about, and although the gameplay loop is ultimately very repetitive, it is really good fun throughout. In fact, the repetitive gameplay loop might be the only negative thing that I really have to say about the game. That said, it is a fairly big negative when the game's so short. Multiple endings give you a chance to play again and see what you can do differently, but when the game is simply fly to this area, drop bombs until you run out of ammo, fly back and reload, and go again, there's a good chance that people might not want to play it for the other endings, really. The game did do a good job of making you feel like you were chipping away at an enemy that was progressing into civilian territory, and that had a plan from the start that you had to really step in and ruin. bombing oil refineries to cut off fuel supplies, searching the map for Scud rocket installations that were being launched at local towns, destroying chemical weapons facilities. It was all varied enough, but also almost slightly disturbingly close to real-life actions, both of the day and today. The Gulf War had only ended 3 years prior to this, and games are made about real-life conflict all the time, but for some reason, something about doing it on the SNES didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't even begin to explain why, so it's not a negative that I could put on the game and say that knocked it down a score or something like that. It was just a feeling that I had. Really enjoyed the music in the game as well. Jun Inoki did a really, really good job. Also worked on Half Minute Hero that I mentioned earlier on. I remember that game having really good music as well. This game had a lot more music tracks than I have had in games previously that I've done on the show. So it was good to properly give them a listen once I'd finished playing. Sometimes when you're actually in the game, the action can kind of make you almost forget that you're listening to the music. So having a proper listen to the music once I'd finished the game and I was doing my research really made me appreciate how good it was. Very, very recommended the music for this particular game. It's a shame there wasn't any multiplayer to the game. Not that I would have been able to benefit from it, but at the time I think it would have been received really well if you could have had maybe someone in the F-15 and someone in the Tank Buster, and you use the F-15 to clear the map of the MiGs while the Tank Buster is going after the ground units and things like that. I think that would have been quite a nice addition to the game, and it is a shame that that wasn't the case. A lot of shoot-em-ups do have a good multiplayer mode, so yeah, a bit of a missed opportunity there, but I don't know how difficult it would have been to implement, and obviously the game was not designed in that way. It was designed as a purely single-player game. Just me thinking that it would have been a bit of fun. The plane models are really nice and are depicted in a 3D-esque way, where when you turn the plane, you see it twist and turn in the air as you would do. Really nice graphics for a SNES game. The building sprites are all clear, and it's very obvious what they're all meant to be. Well, once you've been playing it for a while, it's obvious. I didn't necessarily realise that I was bombing an innocent town to begin with, but when you look at it, when you know that, you can tell the difference. Vehicle sprites are nice. Every now and again, you'll see people running across the battlefield. They're really small, almost unrecognisable. You can engage them as well. You can strafe them with the A-10's air-to-ground cannons. However, whenever I did do that, it seemed like I got the friendly fire warning from the news network, so maybe all the infantry are your own side. I'm not too sure about that. As you play through the missions, you see more friendly units on the ground and less enemy units, and they are moving forward to recover ground that you've cleared out on previous missions. The game was really ambitious with these sorts of things, and they really did manage to pull it off. When you consider a large percentage of people working on this game had never worked on a game before, or if they had, it was a Where's Wally game. So it's really impressive debut for a lot of these people that just never went on to do anything else in the industry, and it does seem like a shame. Something else that I did really like, when you're setting up before the mission, you have a mission screen you can look at, the Intel mission briefing, and it's laid out like a typical military operation computer screen you might see in a movie. At the bottom of the screen, there's a screen with a person you're talking to at the time in it, and it reminds me of the Command & Conquer live-action cutscenes. The animation's very limited, there's no voice acting, but it's a real digitised image with a slight bit of animation to it. And because the screen's so small, it looks really good, especially for a SNES game. It does look like a pixelated TV feed of a real person, and I thought that was really cool. I like that. And just before you take off, you get a screen with a commander that gives you a mission and some really nice pixel art drawings of the installations or areas you'll be coming across in the mission. And after a sortie or two, if you haven't finished the mission, what the commander says will change slightly based on what you've already done, or not done if you've been a bit shit. And it adds a bit of urgency to what he's saying, so if you're running out of time, if there's been civilian casualties, he will change what he says. And again, really ambitious stuff that I really enjoyed for a SNES game. It's all really impressive, and I really had to give it credit for it. As I was finding the reviews for it, I did find out that apparently the game is very similar to Desert Strike, albeit with planes instead of helicopters. Now, I've never played Desert Strike, so I can't really say for sure. And obviously that game did come out 2 years earlier, so if by the time I get to Desert Strike I find out that it is very similar and Desert Strike perhaps does it better, then that is what it is. At the moment, as I'm standing now, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it felt very innovative, really impressive. I don't know if the persistent world and multiple attempts before a mission's complete and things like that are in Desert Strike. Just playing this game in a bubble with no other influence, I thought it did a really good job, and I am interested to see how Desert Strike holds up and what the differences and similarities are. But yeah, I'll get to that when I get to it. I mentioned earlier that there isn't much of a story beyond a typical war scenario sort of thing, but as you play they drop hints of something not being quite right with the enemy forces, secret weapons, there's an unidentified flying object mentioned at one point, and I assumed it would all culminate in a big showdown with some sort of new high-tech flying thing, like a big final boss. So the final mission comes around and you have to bomb the Zarak HQ. They have some special ground-to-air weapons hidden in a large building. You have to blow the roof off of each section and then bomb the gun multiple times. There's hundreds of ground units firing at you. It's all quite tense, dropping flares to counter locked-on missiles, turning to avoid the gunfire from the ground. All the while, you're trying to bomb these guns. It was a great mission, but considering the mission briefing literally mentions aliens out of nowhere, it didn't end up being quite what I expected. I thought it maybe wasn't the last mission, and once I'd done that I'd start facing alien units, but no, the game just ends there. And it is a good ending. I got the good ending. Nice ticker-tape parade, some pixel art of a soldier hugging their family. It is actually quite nice, but that's it. I did look into it, and the bad ending happens if you fail that mission. You get a news report coming in saying the Iraqi forces have launched a nuclear weapon, and there's a really nice looking cutscene of a nuke going off, and the final text crawl says, "The PDF has lost this war. The alien plot to destroy Allied forces and manipulate Zarak leaders has been successful. Surely they will use similar strategies in other areas of the globe, eventually conquering the human race. Imagine the people living among aliens, eating strange food and existing like rats in the dark. Is this the end, or just the beginning?" Which is maybe even weirder than just never addressing the aliens, because unless I missed something really significant, which is possible, I will admit, it just seems like they threw all the alien plot in at the literal endgame text crawl. And I also love that eating strange food is a concern big enough to make it into the End of Days write-up as well. But that's that. It's a very odd story that isn't really a story because you never actually play any of it. A very repetitive gameplay loop, but a very fun one in the 3 or so hours it took me to complete the game. The most fun I've had so far in the series, to be honest, but I know I've definitely got better down the pipeline. So yeah, that's that. Now I'm going to take a look at the box, and something tells me this one's probably going to be pretty accurate, unless they try and sell the alien stuff on the box, of course. The box art for Airstrike Patrol has a nice hand-drawn look showing the A-10 doing what it does best, blowing up shit on the ground. The Europeans got a different piece of art for the Desert Fighter release, which shows the F-15 flying low past a building, firing a rocket off while tanks are exploding. I think I actually prefer the US artwork. I'm never a fan of box art that doesn't seem to have a direction. The F-15 is just firing off screen at something, and something else completely unrelated is blowing up in the background. I'll put both on my blue sky so you can see what I mean and see which you prefer, if you want. Not like I'm going to force you or anything. You'd better do it. As for the back of the box, this is what we get. A vast war zone separates you from your ultimate goal of total victory. You must destroy the enemy's forces and military facilities, including Scud missile sites, fuel pipelines, airfields, and ultimately their command headquarters. Experience thrilling and deadly aerial dogfights, dice with death as rapier missiles streak through the sky and home in on your plane. Blast away the elite ground forces before they bombard you with precision anti-aircraft fire. Choose from 2 of the world's most famous combat aircraft, the F-15 Strike Eagle and the A-10 Tank Buster, to take out the enemy. Multiple control options. Choose the controls that best suit your playing style. Detailed satellite intelligence maps aid you to launch strategic attacks. Not really a great deal to say. Besides, for the second week in a row, spelling and grammar lets it down. They spelled suit wrong. That best suit your playing style. They spelled it like sweet with an E at the end. How is this possible? I get translation. I get that. But they have people, they pay people to localize these things. How are they getting things like this wrong? But other than that, definitely getting a rating of accurate. Does exactly what it says on the tin. So, yeah, let's have a look and see what I found with the reviews. So I found a few mentions of this game, a couple of reviews, some previews, and just mentions in passing. It was quite a lot harder to search because of the two different names, but I'll get into that in a bit. First thing I found was Nintendo Magazine System issue 16, and the reviewer Paul had this to say. I didn't go for this at first. All those little icons and involved information screens make this look like a massively complicated simulation, when in fact it's a reasonably simple shoot 'em up. Not that it's a bad game, mind. Desert Fight is actually really good stuff, and it plays like Desert Strike, but with enough of a difference to make it worthwhile. The action is fast, you get a good feeling of control, and you do have to think about the way you play each mission, saving your missiles for the right target so you don't have to keep restocking at pace and then run out of time. The graphics are good, small but very detailed, and the animation is fine. Though I was surprised at the night mission graphics. It was as clear as day and yet meant to be set at 3 AM. Overall, though, Desert Fight is definitely one of the most appealing Super NES games I've seen recently. Overall score, 90. I agree with most parts of that review, although I don't really know what the problem was with the night mission. Did he want a pitch black screen with like a few twinkling lights? Like, does he not realise how difficult it is to fly at night without seeing a cockpit and seeing all your controls and systems and things? I don't know. It was a weird thing to have a bit of an issue with, but other than that, pretty accurate. And 90, very, very good score. Then I found the US magazine EGM. It gave Airstrike Patrol a very short review. This military simulator is a lot like Desert Strike and Jungle Strike, a slanted perspective where you must guide your aircraft through several missions. Veterans players of these kinds of flying games will immediately take to it, but for others it will take practice to get the game control down. Being a jet, you may have to make several passes over a target in order to destroy it. Still, the cinemas are well done, the GNN news is a nice touch, and there are plenty of weapons to use. Did we refer to like cutscenes as cinemas back then? I mean, I don't recall using it in any of my conversations, but I don't know if it was maybe something from certain parts of the country or something. Is that a thing that I didn't know about? Let me know. It's not something I've ever heard of before. Cinema to me is a building that you go and watch films in. Weirdly, it did crop up again for EGM in their 1999 Buyer's Guide, which is a magazine full of 1 or 2 line reviews and a rating, which I remember looking at. Not EGM, but we had some over in England, and I used to love them because you would get hundreds of reviews, even though they weren't really reviews, but I'd pour through them and look for the games that got the high reviews and keep an eye out for them and stuff like that, and it gave you a really good like database of the games that were out at the time, and something that with the advent of the internet isn't really needed anymore, but I used to really enjoy. And in this magazine it sat right under Air Cavalry, which was called a fairly mediocre flying game, and a couple of lines for Airstrike Patrol were, apparently, games that begin with the word air just aren't that good. Which seems to contradict their fairly positive sounding review they gave it a few years prior, so I don't know why that changed so drastically. And there was also a very quick mention of it in the December 94 issue, where they gave out a cheat code for instant bomb reloads and refueling without having to leave the mission. Remember when we used to have cheat codes for games? I loved that, to be able to get invincibility or infinite weapons and things just by pressing in a code on your controller or typing in a password or something like that. You don't get that anymore. The option to refuel instantly now would be pay $1.99, and it's so upsetting because you got so much more fun out of games when you could use these cheats to GoldenEye big head mode and things like that. It was just to add a layer of fun, a bit of replayability. And yeah, unfortunately, it's just not a thing that we really have anymore. Moving on to Game Informer, their July-August issue. It had a very brief preview. It just offered a few screenshots and a very marketing-esque write-up of the game, really. And it wasn't until Super Play that I got a bit more information from it. So this was the last mention of it under the name Desert Fighter in October of 93, and it was almost a year before it released. Just another standard preview, some nice screenshots, but the preview started by saying that they had already previewed the game 3 months prior in their July issue, when it had a different name. That name was very on the nose, Operation Desert Storm. So this then began a further bit of research into that title, but it brought up about 1 million games set during the conflict, which is the problem if you use real world names for your game title, because there was games called Operation Desert Storm, there was games set during Operation Desert Storm. It was it was impossible to find anything other than that Superplay issue. So all I found was that preview from July of 93. Again, another typical preview. The only thing of note of that was they actually got the name of the game wrong. I swear this game is cursed when it comes to its name. They called it Operation Desert Strike in the main text, but they got the name right in the title of the page, so that's something, I suppose. And that's really it for reviews. They're mostly positive, besides the weird EGM retcon that they did, and mostly agreeing with my thoughts on the game as well. So that's kind of it, really. Airstrike Patrol, Desert Fighter, Operation Desert Storm, whatever you want to call it, is done. Another week down, another game down. Could this have been someone's favourite SNES game? Absolutely. It's been my favourite so far, and I've said yes to all the others, so obviously I'm going to say yes to this. It does make me think this metric may be a little bit broken. Maybe the main aim of the show going forwards to find a game I can say no to. That might be what I'm looking for. I did have a great time playing this. I rated it 3.5. I really only knocked it down for the fact that it has a very repetitive gameplay loop, and that might seem like quite a big knockdown in score for that one thing. But I do think gameplay loop is one of the more important parts of a game, especially from this era. I had a really good time playing it, but even with alternate endings and different things going on during the game, I don't really have a huge urge to jump back into it. If I'd owned it when I was a kid, I think it would have been one of those games I'd dust off once a year just to blow shit up, but with little to no story, the weird alien tease thing, and the gameplay loop, I think 3.5 is a pretty decent score, and it's the highest score I've had so far. Will next week's game topple it off the highest rated game perch? I don't know, because again, it's a game that I've never played before, although the first game I do have nostalgia feelings for is coming very soon, so I'm quite looking forward to that. Next week's game is Real Monsters, based on a cartoon of the same name. I think even if the game is shit, it's going to be a really fun episode. I don't know a great deal about the cartoon. I think it was out over here, but I think it's very much a US main cartoon. I'm very much looking forward to getting into it and having a look at it. I've seen some screenshots, but I've never played it, never seen it moving, and I'm hoping it has that really nice animation-y sort of style, but we will see. Thank you for sticking with me again. If you want to chat shit at me about the episode or any others, if you want to hype any upcoming games that I might not have a clue about, I am on Blue Sky, and that is pretty much it. I am at Jimbo8E6, Jimbo the number 8, the letter E, the number 6. Follow me there. Let me know if this was your favourite game for the system, or if any others have been that I've covered, or if you're looking forward to me covering a specific game. I will very happily get involved in any chat. I am nearly always on there. And yeah, I like to talk games. I like to talk anything, really. So sure, just hit me up and let me know what your thoughts are. Good, bad, what I can improve. I'm happy to listen to anyone. But that really is it. That's all I can say at this point. So all that's left to say is have a great week. Take care. Bye. If you want to... there's a cat gone underneath that car. Oh. It's going underneath another car. What the fuck is it doing? Okay. Weird. Very weird.